The sound of my phone buzzing at 2 a.m. should have been my first warning that my carefully constructed world was about to collapse. But nothing could have prepared me for the voice on the other end, my 16-year-old niece Emma, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. "Uncle Mike, he's gone. Dad's really gone this time." I sat up in bed, my heart already racing. Emma had always been like a daughter to me, especially since her father, my younger brother David, had been drifting away from his family for months. But hearing the raw devastation in her voice told me this wasn't just another one of his disappearing acts. "What happened, sweetheart?" I asked, already reaching for my clothes. "He took his things. All of them." Mom found a note on the kitchen table. Her voice cracked. "He's with her, Uncle Mike. He's not coming back." The her Emma referenced was Jessica, David's coworker who had been slowly poisoning my brother's marriage for the better part of a year. I'd seen the signs, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way David's eyes would light up whenever someone mentioned her name. But I never thought he'd actually abandon his wife of 18 years and his daughter for a woman barely older than Emma herself. I was already in my car, driving through the empty streets toward my sister-in-law Sarah's house. The city looked different at 2 a.m., darker, more honest somehow. Street lights cast long shadows that seemed to reach toward me like fingers, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change forever. When I arrived at Sarah's house, the scene was exactly what I'd expected and somehow worse. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, still in her pajamas, staring at a crumpled piece of paper with hollow eyes. Emma was curled up in the corner of their living room couch, clutching a pillow like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart completely. The note was brief and brutal in its simplicity. "I can't pretend anymore. I'm in love with Jessica, and we're starting a new life together. I'll send money for Emma's expenses, but I need time to figure things out. Don't try to contact me." 18 years of marriage. 16 years of fatherhood. Reduced to 3 sentences scrawled on notebook paper. Sarah looked up at me with eyes that had aged a decade in a single night. "He didn't even say goodbye to her, Mike. Emma came home from her friend's house and he was just gone. What kind of man does that to his own daughter?" I wish I'd had an answer. Instead, I sat down and held my family while they fell apart, promising them both that we'd get through this together. At that moment, I had no idea how tested that promise would become. The first few weeks after David left were a blur of practical necessities mixed with emotional devastation. Sarah had to figure out how to manage the mortgage on a single income. Emma's grades plummeted as she struggled to process her father's abandonment. And I found myself stepping into a role I'd never expected, becoming the primary male figure in Emma's life while my brother played house with his mistress across town. The worst part was watching Emma's transformation. She'd always been such a vibrant, confident kid, captain of her debate team, honor roll student, the kind of teenager who still hugged her parents goodbye in front of her friends. But David's abandonment carved something fundamental out of her. She became withdrawn, suspicious of everyone's motives, and devastatingly convinced that she wasn't worth staying for. "If my own dad can just walk away," she told me one evening as I helped her with calculus homework, "what does that say about me?" It broke my heart because I knew exactly what David's selfishness had done to her sense of self-worth. But I also knew that platitudes about how it wasn't her fault wouldn't fix the damage. Emma needed consistency, reliability, and above all, she needed to know that not every adult in her life would abandon her when things got complicated. So I showed up. Every day. I drove her to school when Sarah had to work early shifts. I sat through her debate tournaments, cheering louder than any of the other parents. I helped her study for her SATs and listened to her vent about friend drama and college applications. I became the steady presence in her life that David should have been. Meanwhile, David was radio silent. No phone calls, no visits, no acknowledgement that he had a daughter who desperately needed her father. The promised financial support came sporadically and without explanation, sometimes early, sometimes late, as if Emma's needs were an afterthought in his new life. But the real test came 6 months later, when David finally decided he was ready to fix things. I was at my office when he called, his voice carrying that familiar mix of charm and entitlement that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. "Mike, I need your help," he said without preamble. Emma won't return my calls, and Sarah hangs up on me. I know I made mistakes, but I'm ready to make things right now. Mistakes? I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. David, you abandoned your family. You left your daughter a note on the kitchen table. These aren't mistakes, they're choices. Look, I know you're angry, he continued as if I hadn't spoken, but Jessica and I are getting married next month, and I want Emma to be there. I want her to see that I'm happy, that this wasn't just some midlife crisis. She needs to understand that sometimes people grow apart, and that doesn't mean I love her any less. The audacity of it left me speechless. David wanted Emma to celebrate the relationship that had destroyed her family. He wanted her blessing on the marriage that had cost her her sense of security and self-worth. And he wanted me to convince her to give it. Have you lost your mind? I asked. Emma is barely speaking to anyone these days. Her grades are suffering, she's in therapy, and you want her to be your wedding witness. She's being dramatic, David said dismissively. Kids are resilient. She'll get over it once she sees how good Jessica is for me. But I need you to talk to her. You're the only one she trusts now. And there it was. The crux of the whole situation. David had abdicated his role as Emma's father, and now he expected me to use the relationship I'd built with her to serve his needs. He wanted me to leverage Emma's trust to make his life easier. No, I said simply. What? No, David. I won't do it. If you want a relationship with your daughter, you need to earn it back yourself. You don't get to walk away for 6 months and then expect everyone else to clean up your mess. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long I thought he'd hung up. When David finally spoke again, his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. I'm your brother. Family is supposed to support each other. You're right, I replied. Family is supposed to support each other. Emma is my family too, and right now, she needs protection from you more than she needs reconciliation. That conversation marked the beginning of a war I never wanted to fight. Within days, I was getting calls from our parents, our sister Rachel, various aunts and uncles, and even some family friends. The message was always the same. I needed to stop being stubborn and help David repair his relationship with Emma. He's trying to make things right, my mother argued during one particularly heated phone conversation. You can't keep a father from his daughter forever. I'm not keeping him from anything, Mom. Emma is 16, not 6. She gets to decide who she wants in her life. She's a child. Children don't know what's best for them. Sometimes they need adults to push them toward forgiveness. The pressure was relentless and came from every direction. Family gatherings became exercises in endurance as relatives took turns explaining why I was wrong to enable Emma's stubbornness. They painted David as a flawed but repentant father who deserved a second chance, and me as the vindictive brother standing in the way of family healing. But they hadn't seen what I'd seen. They hadn't watched Emma flinch every time her phone rang, hoping it was her father calling to apologize. They hadn't held her while she sobbed about feeling abandoned and worthless. They hadn't witnessed the slow, painful process of rebuilding her confidence from scratch. Most importantly, they hadn't been there when Emma finally opened up about the months leading up to David's departure. The story she told me on a quiet evening in November changed everything I thought I knew. ABO, it wasn't sudden, Uncle Mike, she said, curled up in the corner of my couch with a cup of hot chocolate. Dad had been pulling away for months. He stopped coming to my debate tournaments. He'd get irritated when I tried to talk to him about school or friends. It was like I was just in his way. She paused, staring into her mug as if searching for the right words. My brother's betrayal. The night before he left, I tried to talk to him about college applications. I'd gotten accepted to my first choice school, and I was so excited. But when I told him, he just sighed. Like my success was this huge burden. He said college was expensive and maybe I should consider community college instead. Emma's voice got quieter. Then Jessica called, and suddenly he was laughing and excited, making plans to meet her for coffee to discuss work. He spent an hour on the phone with her. An hour? But he couldn't give me 5 minutes to celebrate the biggest achievement of my life. The picture Emma painted was devastating in its clarity. David hadn't just woken up one day and decided to leave his family. He'd been emotionally abandoning them for months, treating his wife and daughter like obstacles to his happiness rather than the people who should have mattered most. The worst part, Emma continued, is that I kept trying to win him back. I thought if I was funnier, smarter, less needy, maybe he'd want to be my dad again. I spent months walking on eggshells, trying to be the perfect daughter so he wouldn't leave. And there it was. The real tragedy of David's betrayal. He hadn't just abandoned his family, he'd spent months teaching his daughter that she wasn't worth staying for. He'd trained her to believe that love was conditional, that she had to earn the basic affection and attention every child deserves. After that conversation, I knew I'd made the right choice. Emma didn't need to forgive her father. She needed to heal from the damage he'd done. She needed to learn that her worth wasn't determined by David's ability to love her. And she needed to understand that some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive, at least not until the person who caused them has truly acknowledged their impact and done the work to change. But my family saw my support for Emma as stubborn vindictiveness. The pressure to reconcile intensified after David's wedding, which took place in a small ceremony that none of us attended. Photos on social media showed a happy couple surrounded by Jessica's family and friends, with no acknowledgement of the daughter David had left behind. The breaking point came during Christmas dinner at my parents' house. Emma had reluctantly agreed to attend, though she'd been anxious about it all week. She knew the family would use the gathering as another opportunity to push for reconciliation with her father. Sure enough, halfway through dinner, my sister Rachel brought up the elephant in the room. "Emma, honey," she said with that patronizing tone adults use when they're about to deliver unwanted life advice. "I know you're hurt by your father's choices, but holding on to anger is only going to hurt you in the long run. Don't you think it's time to at least try talking to him?" Emma's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I could see her shoulders tense, could practically feel the anxiety radiating off her. She'd been dreading this moment all evening. "I don't want to talk about this," she said quietly. "But sweetie," my mother chimed in, "he's your father. Family is family, no matter what. Maybe if you just gave him a chance to explain." "Explain what?" Emma's voice was sharp now, cutting through the gentle coercion. "Explain how he decided his happiness was more important than his family? Explain how he abandoned me without even saying goodbye? Explain how he's posting pictures of his perfect new life while I'm in therapy trying to figure out why I wasn't worth staying for?" The room fell silent. Emma rarely raised her voice, and her pain was so raw, so visible, that even my well-meaning relatives seemed to realize they'd pushed too far. But my father, apparently, didn't get the message. "Emma," he said sternly, "you're being disrespectful. Your father made some poor choices, but he's trying to make amends. The least you can do is meet him halfway." That's when I'd had enough. "No," I said, standing up from the table. "She doesn't owe him anything. David destroyed this family, and now you all want Emma to fix it for him? She's 16 years old. She shouldn't have to manage her father's guilt or his relationship needs." "Mike," my mother said, "you're not helping anyone by encouraging her to hold grudges." "I'm not encouraging grudges. I'm supporting a traumatized teenager who needs to heal at her own pace. If David wants a relationship with his daughter, he needs to earn it. He needs to acknowledge what he did, apologize meaningfully, and prove that he's changed. Emma doesn't owe him forgiveness just because they share DNA." The argument that followed was ugly and loud, with accusations flying from every direction. I was called selfish, vindictive, and damaging to Emma's well-being. My parents suggested I was using Emma's pain to punish David for childhood grievances. Rachel accused me of playing hero at the expense of family unity. But through it all, Emma sat quietly beside me, and when the yelling got too intense, she reached over and squeezed my hand. That simple gesture told me everything I needed to know about whether I was making the right choice. We left dinner early that night, and as I drove Emma home, she finally spoke. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not making me feel crazy. For not telling me I have to forgive him just because everyone else thinks I should. You never have to forgive anyone who hurt you, Emma. Forgiveness is a gift you give when you're ready, not an obligation you fulfill for other people's comfort." That night marked a turning point in our family dynamics. The relatives who'd been pressuring me to facilitate reconciliation began to distance themselves, frustrated by my refusal to bend. Family gatherings became smaller, tenser affairs, with an undercurrent of resentment toward my stubbornness. Meanwhile, David's attempts to reconnect with Emma became increasingly desperate and manipulative. He started showing up at her school, forcing awkward conversations in public places where she couldn't escape. He sent expensive gifts with notes about how much he missed her. He even tried using Emma's friends as intermediaries, asking them to convince her to give him another chance. Each of these attempts set Emma back emotionally. Just when she'd start to feel stable and confident again, David would reappear, reopening all the wounds his abandonment had created. It was like watching someone try to heal from a broken bone that kept getting re-injured. The worst incident happened in March, almost a year after David had left. Emma was walking out of her after-school job when David appeared, flanked by Jessica and their obviously pregnant silhouette. "Emma," David called out, as if this was a pleasant surprise rather than an ambush. "I'm so glad I found you. We have some news to share." Emma told me later that she'd never felt more trapped. Here was her father, who had abandoned her and refused her calls for months, treating her like a casual acquaintance he'd run into at the grocery store. And beside him stood the woman who had helped destroy her family, now carrying the sibling Emma would never get to know. "I'm having a baby, Emma," David announced, his voice full of excitement that made her stomach turn. "You're going to be a big sister. Isn't that wonderful?" The cruelty of that moment, asking Emma to celebrate the expansion of the family that had replaced her, was breathtaking in its obliviousness. Emma later described feeling like she was watching the scene from outside her own body, unable to process the surreal nature of her father's expectations. "Congratulations," she managed to say, her voice hollow. "We were hoping you'd like to be involved," Jessica added, speaking for the first time. "Maybe you could babysit sometimes, or help pick out nursery decorations. I know this situation has been difficult, but we really want you to be part of our new family." Emma looked at this woman, barely 10 years older than herself, who was offering her a supporting role in the life that had replaced her own. The woman who had known Emma existed when she began her relationship with David, who had helped orchestrate the destruction of a marriage and the abandonment of a child, was now asking for sisterly cooperation. "I have to go," Emma said simply and walked away. But David wasn't finished. He followed her to my car, where I was waiting to drive her home. "Emma, wait," he called. "Don't walk away from me. I'm trying to include you in my life." She turned around then, and I saw something in her face I'd never seen before, not just pain or anger, but a kind of exhausted clarity. "You don't get to have me in your life anymore, Dad," she said quietly. "You made your choice. You chose Jessica over Mom. You chose your new family over me. And that's fine. But you don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to abandon me and then expect me to celebrate your happiness. Emma, that's not fair." "Fair." Her voice rose then, all the pain and anger of the past year finally finding expression. "You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that I spent months thinking I wasn't good enough for my own father? Is it fair that I had to find out through a note that you were leaving? Is it fair that you missed my birthday, my debate championships, my college acceptance, because you were too busy playing house with her?" David looked stunned, as if he'd never considered the specific moments of Emma's life he'd missed while building his new one. "I was going through a difficult time." "So was I," Emma shouted. "But the difference is, I didn't abandon anyone. I didn't break my promises. I didn't choose my happiness over other people's well-being. You did that. And now you want me to pretend it didn't happen so you can feel better about yourself." She got in my car then, slamming the door with a finality that felt like the end of something. As we drove away, I could see David in my rearview mirror, standing in the parking lot with Jessica, looking lost and confused. That confrontation seemed to break something in David's determination to force a reconciliation. His attempts to contact Emma became less frequent, though they never stopped entirely. Meanwhile, Emma began to flourish in ways that reminded me of the confident, vibrant girl she'd been before her father's betrayal. She threw herself into her senior year with renewed focus, earning a full scholarship to her dream college and graduating as valedictorian. Her confidence returned slowly but steadily, built on the foundation of relationships with people who had proven their reliability. She began dating a sweet boy named Marcus who treated her with the respect and consistency she'd learned to value above all else. Most importantly, she started talking about her future with excitement rather than fear. College, career plans, travel dreams, all the possibilities that had seemed overwhelming when she felt worthless and abandoned began to fade, but even as Emma healed, the family remained fractured. My parents maintained their position that I was being unnecessarily harsh toward David, while my sister Rachel had essentially stopped speaking to me altogether. Family events became exercises in careful navigation, with relatives choosing sides and conversations carefully controlled to avoid the topic of David and Emma's relationship. The situation reached its breaking point 2 years later, during what should have been a celebratory time. Emma had just finished her first year of college with a perfect GPA and had landed a competitive internship for the summer. She was thriving academically, socially, and emotionally, finally becoming the woman she was meant to be before David's abandonment had derailed her sense of self. But then David's second child was born, a son he named Michael, presumably after me. Whether this was meant as some kind of peace offering or twisted manipulation, I never found out. What I did know was that David's social media was suddenly full of pictures of himself as the devoted father he'd never been to Emma. Photos of midnight feedings, first smiles, father-son bonding moments, all the tender parenting David had abandoned when Emma needed him most. The message was clear: he was capable of being a good father when the circumstances suited him. Emma just hadn't been worth the effort. The final straw came when my mother called to tell me that David wanted Emma to meet her new brother. "He's really changed, Mike," she insisted. "Having a son has made him realize what's important. He wants to make things right with Emma. Then he can call her himself and apologize for abandoning her," I replied. "He can acknowledge the damage he did and commit to earning back her trust. What he can't do is use his new baby as leverage to force a reconciliation." "Why are you so determined to keep this family broken?" my mother asked, her frustration finally boiling over. "David made mistakes, but he's trying to fix them. Emma is being stubborn, and you're encouraging her. This has gone on long enough." "Emma isn't being stubborn. She's protecting herself from someone who has proven he can't be trusted with her emotional well-being. And if supporting her means keeping this family broken, then so be it. Achievable again." That conversation marked the final deterioration of my relationship with most of my extended family. The message was clear: either I convince Emma to reconcile with David, or I could consider myself partially estranged from the rest of them. It was an ultimatum I'd been expecting for months, and my answer was immediate: Emma's well-being would always be my priority, regardless of the cost to other relationships. But the real validation of my choice came from an unexpected source. 3 months after David's son was born, Emma came home from college for winter break. We were having dinner at her favorite restaurant when she brought up her father for the first time in months. "I saw the pictures," she said quietly, cutting into her salmon, "of Dad with the baby." My heart clenched, waiting for the pain and anger I'd seen so many times before. Instead, Emma looked peaceful. "How did that feel?" I asked carefully. She was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Sad, I guess. But not for the reasons you might think. I'm not sad that he's being a good father to that baby. I'm sad that he wasn't capable of being that father to me." She took a bite of her food, choosing her words carefully. "I used to think that if I was just better, smarter, funnier, less needy, maybe he would have stayed. But seeing him with his new family made me realize the problem was never with me. The problem was with him. He was never capable of being the father I needed, not because I wasn't good enough, but because he wasn't." The maturity in her voice, the hard-won wisdom behind her words, told me everything I needed to know about the choices I'd made over the past 3 years. "Do you think you'll ever want a relationship with him?" I asked. Emma shrugged. "Maybe someday. If he ever takes real responsibility for what he did and proves he's actually changed. But I'm not holding my breath." And I'm definitely not going to keep hurting myself trying to earn love from someone who's proven he's not capable of giving it consistently. She looked at me then, her eyes bright with unshed tears but also with something that looked like gratitude. Thank you for not making me forgive him before I was ready. Thank you for not telling me I had to fix his mistakes. Thank you for showing me that I deserve better than people who abandon me when loving me becomes inconvenient. In that moment, I knew that every family relationship I'd sacrificed, every awkward holiday dinner I'd endured, every accusation of stubbornness and vindictiveness I'd weathered, had been worth it. Emma was whole again. Not because she'd forgiven her father, but because she'd learned to forgive herself for his failures. The story might have ended there, with Emma thriving in college and David living his new life with his replacement family. But life has a way of complicating even the clearest moral situations. Last month, I got a call that changed everything once again. David had been in a serious car accident, and he was asking for Emma. Jessica, now his wife, was the one who called me. Her voice was shaky, filled with fear and desperation that was almost impossible to ignore. "Mike, I know this is complicated," she began, "but David is in the ICU, and he keeps asking for Emma. The doctors don't know if he's going to make it, and I think he has things he needs to say to her." Part of me wanted to hang up immediately. After 4 years of watching David's selfishness devastate my niece, my first instinct was to protect her from yet another manipulation. Even unconscious in a hospital bed, David was managing to disrupt Emma's peace. But another part of me wondered if this might finally be the moment David would take responsibility for his actions. Maybe facing his own mortality had given him the perspective to understand the damage he'd done to his daughter. I called Emma and told her about the accident, making it clear that the choice of whether to see him was entirely hers. "I don't owe him a deathbed reconciliation," she said firmly. "If he wanted to apologize, he had 4 years to do it." "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "But I want you to make this decision for yourself, not because you're angry or hurt. If you think you might regret not seeing him, then maybe you should consider it. But if you know in your heart that you're at peace with where things stand, then don't let anyone pressure you into going." Emma was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and sure. "I want to see him. Not because I owe him anything, but because I want to know if he's finally ready to be honest about what he did to me." We drove to the hospital together, Emma's hand tightly gripped in mine as we walked through the antiseptic corridors. When we reached David's room, Jessica met us in the hallway. "Thank you for coming," she said to Emma, her eyes red from crying. "He's been asking for you constantly. I think he knows he might not make it." Emma nodded but didn't respond. We entered the room where my brother lay connected to various machines, his face pale and drawn but his eyes alert. When he saw Emma, relief flooded his features. "Emma," he whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed hours earlier. "You came." "I'm here," she said simply, taking the chair beside his bed. For a moment, they just looked at each other, father and daughter, separated by 4 years of pain and betrayal but connected by bonds that couldn't be entirely severed. "I'm sorry," David said finally, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'm so sorry for everything I did to you, to your mother, to our family. I was selfish and cruel, and I destroyed the most important relationships in my life because I was too cowardly to deal with my own problems." Emma listened without interruption, her face carefully neutral. "I know saying sorry doesn't fix anything," David continued. "I know I can't undo the damage I caused or give you back the security I took away. But I need you to know that leaving you was the worst mistake of my life. Not because I might die, but because I missed watching you become the incredible woman you are." He paused. "You were never the problem, Emma. You were perfect exactly as you were. I was the problem. I was weak and selfish, and I chose temporary happiness over permanent love. I chose easy over right, and I've regretted it every single day since." Emma was crying now, for years of pain and anger finally finding release in the face of the apology she'd never expected to receive. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why wasn't I enough to make you stay?" struggling to find the right words. "You were more than enough," David said firmly. "You were everything. But I wasn't enough. I wasn't strong enough to be the father you deserved, the husband your mother deserved, the man I should have been. And instead of facing that and working to become better, I ran away and blamed everyone else for my failures. They talked for another hour, with David taking full responsibility for his abandonment and its impact on Emma's life. He didn't make excuses or try to minimize the damage he'd caused. He simply acknowledged the truth of what he'd done and expressed genuine remorse for the pain he'd caused. When visiting hours ended, Emma kissed her father's forehead and told him she forgave him. Not because she had to, but because she was finally ready to let go of the anger that had weighed her down for so long. David died 3 days later, but not before Emma had the chance to say everything she needed to say. His final gift to his daughter wasn't reconciliation, it was honesty. He gave her the validation she'd needed to hear, that his abandonment was about his own failures, not her worth as a person. At the funeral, I watched Emma deliver a eulogy that was both honest and gracious. She spoke about the father David had been in her early childhood, loving, present, engaged, and the man he'd become in his final days, repentant, honest, and finally willing to take responsibility for his mistakes. She didn't minimize his abandonment, but she also didn't let it define his entire legacy. After the service, several family members approached me to acknowledge that my support for Emma's autonomy had been the right choice. My mother, in particular, apologized for the pressure she'd put on me to force a reconciliation. "You knew Emma better than we did," she said, tears in her eyes. "You knew she needed to heal at her own pace, and you protected her right to do that. If we had forced her to forgive him before she was ready, she might never have been able to have that conversation with him at the end." 6 months have passed since David's death, and Emma continues to thrive. She's in her senior year of college now, planning graduate school and building relationships with people who value and respect her. The confidence and joy that David's abandonment had stolen from her have returned, stronger and more resilient than before. She still talks about her father sometimes, not with the pain and anger that once consumed her, but with a kind of sad acceptance of who he was and what he was capable of giving. She's learned to separate her worth from his ability to love her consistently, and that lesson has freed her to build healthier relationships with others. Looking back on the past 4 years, I know I made the right choice in refusing to pressure Emma to reconcile with David before she was ready. Forgiveness can't be forced or rushed. It has to be earned and freely given. By protecting Emma's right to heal at her own pace, I gave her the space to eventually choose forgiveness on her own terms rather than having it imposed on her by family pressure. The cost was significant: strained relationships with other family members, uncomfortable holidays, and the constant accusation that I was being vindictive or stubborn. But watching Emma reclaim her confidence and build a life based on her own values rather than others' expectations made every sacrifice worthwhile. Sometimes being a good family member means protecting someone from the rest of the family. Sometimes love means refusing to enable toxic behavior, even when that behavior comes from people we care about. And sometimes the most healing thing we can do for someone we love is simply to believe them when they tell us they've been hurt. Emma taught me that forgiveness is not a debt owed to those who hurt us. It's a gift we give ourselves when we're ready to let go of anger and pain. By refusing to demand that gift prematurely, I helped her preserve its power and meaning. Today, Emma is planning her wedding to Marcus, the young man who has shown her what consistent, reliable love looks like. She asked me to walk her down the aisle, and I accepted with pride and gratitude. Not because I replaced her father, but because I proved to her that some people in her life will never abandon her, no matter how complicated things become. As I think about the choices I made during those difficult years, I keep coming back to one simple truth. Sometimes protecting someone means saying no to everyone else. The family members who pressured me to facilitate reconciliation weren't evil or malicious. They genuinely believed that forgiveness would heal Emma's pain and restore family harmony. But they were looking at the situation from their own perspective, adults who wanted the discomfort of family drama to end, rather than from Emma's perspective as a traumatized teenager who needed time and space to rebuild her sense of self-worth. In our culture, we're taught that forgiveness is always the noble choice, that holding grudges is petty and destructive, that family bonds should supersede personal boundaries. But Emma's story taught me that these well-intentioned beliefs can sometimes cause more harm. Emma didn't need to forgive her father to move forward with her life. She needed to understand that his abandonment was about his failures, not her worth. She needed to learn that love shouldn't be conditional or unreliable. She needed to experience what it felt like to have adults in her life who wouldn't abandon her when supporting her became difficult. By refusing to pressure her into premature forgiveness, I gave her the gift of authentic healing rather than performative reconciliation. When she finally did forgive David, it was because she had genuinely processed her pain and reached a place of peace, not because she'd been guilted into it by family pressure than healing. The irony is that my refusal to force reconciliation ultimately made genuine reconciliation possible. If I had succeeded in pressuring Emma to reconnect with David before she was ready, she might have gone through the motions of forgiveness while remaining deeply wounded and resentful. Their final conversation in the hospital was meaningful precisely because it was Emma's authentic choice, made from a place of strength rather than obligation. Now, as I prepare to walk Emma down the aisle, I think about the lessons her story holds for all of us. When someone we love is hurting, our instinct is often to fix the situation as quickly as possible. We want to mediate, to smooth things over, to restore harmony. But sometimes the most loving thing we can do is simply to witness their pain without trying to rush them past it. Emma's journey from abandonment to healing wasn't quick or easy. It took 4 years of therapy, consistent support, and the freedom to feel angry and hurt without being told those feelings were wrong or excessive. But because she was allowed to heal authentically, her recovery was genuine and lasting. The wedding is next month, and Emma has asked me to give a speech at the reception. I've been thinking about what to say, how to capture the journey we've been on together without overshadowing her joy with reminders of past pain. I think I'll talk about resilience, about the remarkable capacity humans have to rebuild themselves after devastating losses. I'll talk about the importance of having people in your life who will stand by you even when it's difficult or unpopular. And I'll talk about the difference between healing and fixing, how sometimes the most profound growth happens not when we solve problems quickly, but when we learn to sit with difficulty until we find our own way through it. But mostly, I'll talk about Emma, the incredible woman she's become not despite her father's abandonment, but because she was given the space and support to process that abandonment on her own terms. She's stronger now, more discerning in her relationships, more aware of her own worth. The pain she endured wasn't meaningless. It taught her lessons about resilience and self-respect that will serve her for the rest of her life. Looking back, I realized that the question, "Am I the asshole for not begging my niece to let her dad off the hook?" was really asking something much deeper. Is it okay to prioritize one person's healing over everyone else's comfort? Is it okay to refuse to enable someone's bad behavior, even if they're family? Is it okay to let relationships break rather than forcing artificial reconciliation? For Emma and me, the answer to all those questions was yes. Sometimes being the asshole, standing firm in your convictions even when everyone else thinks you're wrong, is exactly what someone needs from you. Emma's story is ultimately about the power of unconditional support and the importance of allowing people to heal at their own pace. It's about the difference between forgiveness that's earned and forgiveness that's imposed. And it's about the profound impact one person can have simply by refusing to abandon someone when the rest of the world expects them to get over their pain and move on. As I finish writing this, I can hear Emma laughing in the next room as she and Marcus plan their honeymoon. The sound of her genuine happiness, not the forced cheerfulness of someone pretending to be okay, but the real joy of someone who has found peace with herself and her past, reminds me why every difficult choice I made was worth it. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is simply refuse to give up on them, even when everyone else thinks you should. Sometimes love means standing alone in your convictions, whether in criticism and family pressure, because you know in your heart that the person you're protecting needs your strength more than they need easy reconciliation. Emma's wedding invitation sits on my desk, and every time I look at it, I'm reminded of the scared, broken 16-year-old who called me at 2 a.m. 4 years ago. The transformation from that girl to the confident woman planning her future is nothing short of miraculous, not because she learned to forgive her father, but because she learned to value herself enough to demand better from the people in her life. So to anyone who might find themselves in a similar situation, watching a loved one struggle with betrayal or abandonment while family members pressure for quick forgiveness, I want you to know that it's okay to say no. It's okay to prioritize healing over harmony. It's okay to stand with the person who's been hurt, even if it means standing against everyone else. The path of authentic healing is longer and more difficult than the path of forced reconciliation, but the destination is so much more beautiful. Emma's story is proof that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is simply refuse to abandon someone, no matter how long it takes them to find their way back to wholeness. What would you do in this situation? Would you stand with someone you love against family pressure, or would you try to broker peace at any cost? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more real experiences about family, loyalty, and the complicated nature of forgiveness, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. These stories matter because they remind us that real life is messier and more complex than simple moral lessons, and sometimes the most profound acts of love happen not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of unwavering support. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most important battles we fight are the ones nobody else understands.